John 3:17, for God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. God didn't send Jesus. Jesus didn't come here to judge and condemn the world, but he sent you instead. I'm Zach. This is The Average Christian, a project simply about relationships with God, how to live out a practical, everyday relationship. So we're looking at that practicality, how to live this. We're looking at truth. We're looking at also dispelling myths about Christianity, even those held by some of us. So welcome. I hope that this project helps you out in some way. We'd love for you to get involved. Let us know you're out there. So if you are listening to the podcast, please rate and review when you're done with this. If it helped you, let us know by leaving comments, leaving suggestions for us. If you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, the notification bell, and that will let you know when we come out with new content. And also leave comments and the like or even the dislike button if this wasn't what you were looking for. So let's get into it. Judging, that's the topic. I started off in John 3:17, but this is a hot topic no matter when you talk about it. So let's just look at it here because there are all types of different things said. And maybe one of the most popular, even by Christians, is that you can't judge me, only God can judge me, which is really a serious statement to make. But looking at judging, I am allowed by God and even required by God to make some judgment calls, but what are those? And we also know the bad, the negative side of it. So that's where I'm going to start. I'm going to read you some verses. I'm going to put Clayton to work by putting these up on the screen for you. Let me start, though, with some Greek just to get behind this word judge. When you look up Matthew 7 and verse 1, judge not, this is what's behind that word: to separate, to pick out, select, choose, to be of an opinion, to think, to determine, resolve, to decree, to pronounce an opinion concerning right and wrong, pronounce judgment, subject to censure of those who act the part of judges or arbiters in matters of common life, or pass judgment on the deeds and words of others, to rule or govern. So Jesus is saying here, don't do that. Now, I'm going to tell you and let you in on a little secret that I've probably mentioned before, but I'll say it again. As far as I can see, every sin in some way, shape, or form involves me trying to play God. And God does not need my help in judging and condemning other people. That's specifically why I started in John 3. Let me give you some of these of where we're warned not to judge like this. I'll detail that a little bit more as I look at the ways in which the Lord not only has asked us to, but requires us to make judgments. All right, Matthew 5 and verse 40. If anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. Same word or root word there. Matthew 19 and verse 28. Truly I say to you, in the new world, when the Son of Man will sit on his glorious throne, you who have followed me will also sit on the 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Luke 12:57. Why do you not judge for yourselves what is right? Luke 6:37. Judge not, you will not be judged. Condemn not, you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. I read to you John 3:17 and 18. You can follow that up later. John 8:15 and 16. You judge according to the flesh. I judge no one, Jesus says. Yet even if I do judge, my judgment is true, for it is not I alone who judge, but I and the Father who sent me. Romans 12:1 and 2. Therefore, you have no excuse, O man, or Romans 2:1 and 2, excuse me. You have no excuse, O man, every one of you who judges, for in passing judgment on another, you condemn yourself, because you, the judge, practice the very same things. We know that the judgment of God rightly falls on those who practice such things. James 2 and verse 10, whoever keeps the whole law but fails in one point has become guilty of all of it. There's Romans 14:3 and 4 for your reading, chapter 14 as well, in verses 10 through 13. You can look up 1 Corinthians 4:3 through 5. James 4:11 through 12. Do not speak evil against one another, brothers. The one who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks evil against the law and judges the law. And then there's Revelation 20:12 and verse 13. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. The dead were judged by what was written in the books according to what they had done, and the sea gave up the dead who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them, and they were judged, each one of them, according to what they had done. That is God's judgment. That's off limits. Jesus specifically said, don't do that to other people. There will be a time for it. The Lord's not even doing it right now. If you want to be exact here, but that's not my role and not my place. And I'll differentiate that from the following. Now, many of us know John 7:24, and we use the phrase, even if you don't know where it comes from in the Bible. Jesus says, do not judge by appearance, but judge with righteous judgment. So it is allowed. What's the purpose behind it? How do I go about it? Let me give you some examples. And to be righteous, by the way, if you're wondering what that word means, it's observing divine laws in a wide sense, upright, righteous, virtuous, keeping the commands of God, innocent, faultless. Only Christ truly, but we're trying to be Christ-like. So if I'm going to judge somebody else, it has to be in a righteous way. Well, what does that mean? See, I hear people put a thumbtack of righteous judgment on this condemnation that they use. I've seen people write to others and say, well, I say this in love, and then just totally skewer them over what it is they're condemning them for, basically, and they're judging them the way that God does. They're not looking to help. They're just looking to tear down. So let's get some scriptures in here, and then I'll finish this up by detailing it a little better. Matthew 7:17 through 20, same chapter as what I started with in Matthew 7:1, where Jesus says, judge not. In Matthew 7:17 through 20. So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Here's your key phrase. Thus you will recognize them by their fruits, by what they produce. So I am to observe. I can know whether somebody is acting in a good way or a bad way according to God's laws, according to what he says, by observing them and watching them. And I can make those judgments for reasons that I'll explain here in just a moment. How about 2 Corinthians 6:14 through 18? Do not be unequally yoked. He's talking to Christians here. Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what partnership is righteousness with lawlessness? Or what fellowship is light with darkness? What accord is Christ with Belial? What portion does a believer share with an unbeliever? What agreement has the temple of God with idols? And he goes on and continues on there. You can read that for yourself. But I've got to make judgments. I've got to be able to look at somebody and say, this person is not somebody I need to be yoked with. Now, that's an entirely different discussion for a later video, but this is somebody I don't need to have that, literally speaking in the Bible, that fellowship with, is somebody who's unrighteous. I have no business with them. And there are reasons for that as well. I'll get into for briefly here. I have to protect my righteousness. And if you're bad for me to be around, if you can lead me astray, if you can be that bad influence on me, I've got to keep somewhat of a distance, not completely. Jesus, of course, was in the world himself, but I've got to keep some sort of distance. And in order to do that, I've got to make a judgment that you're not good for me to be around. 1 Corinthians 15:33, do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals. Bad, and that's the point I was just making, right? These people were confused about the resurrection because of the company that they were around, and the people that they were listening to were wildly confused about the resurrection from the dead. And so Paul has to correct them. And in the middle of that correction and instruction, he makes that statement. How about 1 Corinthians 5 and verse 5? You are to deliver this man, this sinner that continues on amongst his brethren. You are to deliver this man to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, so that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord. This guy was guilty of sin, and he was parading around amongst the church, and they weren't doing anything about it. We're acting like everything's okay. There's no problem. And Paul says, look, I've already dealt with him. You need to deal with him now, and you need to get him out from amongst your midst. And there are reasons behind that as well, because he cannot be allowed, he or she, in our case, cannot be allowed to destroy the holiness of the church. And it's for their benefit, because this person needed to know his lifestyle was not right. Things had to change. And so it took an extreme measure in this case in order to hopefully help him realize that he was living in sin and needed to change. 1 Timothy 3:1 and 2. The saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. That's an elder, as many talk about. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach. If you're going to select somebody from among you who's going to be an elder in the church, you have to make a judgment. You have to look at that man and say, he is these types of things. He lives up to these qualifications, as we commonly call them in the Bible, and this man would be good as an elder in the church. So see, there are good judgments. So let me bring this all together now. It's not comprehensive in any way, but at least in a general way, we can get a hold of this thing called judging. The first negative aspects that Jesus warns that is not my responsibility, my job, I was not sent to do that, is the judgment to condemn somebody else. Those type of judgments, and many of you, by the way, if you're watching this video and you're thinking that, well, that's not me, well, you're lying to yourself, because at some point, in some way, you have done this to other people and may still be doing it. So don't pass it off to somebody else. But it's a negative judgment that doesn't seek to help. It just seeks to condemn. That's what the Lord tells us not to do. The difference in righteous judgment, the contrast is, I look at you or anyone else and make a judgment to bring about a good result, a good end result. And I gave you the examples. I have to make judgment calls about who I marry. You have to make judgment calls about who you hang around with and who you spend your time with. You have to make judgment calls about your brother or sister who may be lost, who may be endangering their souls. In order to go to them and correct them and try to help them, you have to make judgment calls. You have to make a judgment call about who is going to be leaders in the Lord's church. But that type of judgment always seeks a good. It seeks to help. It seeks to correct. It seeks to do something for the benefit of other people. This condemnation, that type of judgment, it's not looking to help anybody. It's just looking to call out and condemn. And when everything is said and done, grace is finally over. That's the Lord's job. It always has been. It always will be. Hopefully that explains the difference. I hope that it will help you. I hope you'll think about how you treat other people. I certainly need work in this area. And people who are watching this video and know me know that I've struggled in this area. But all of us need to do a better job of looking at other people and saying, how can I help you, not tear you down?